This morning, the rise of cyborgs, the end of nation states, and the coming of the hybrid reality. Plus, the United States makes a practice of kicking the best and brightest out of our country. But that's about to change. And the world holds its breath as Greeks and Egyptians head to the polls this weekend. Greeks and Egyptians, them again? Once again, global stability is in their hands. But first, two men, two paths, one choice. The articulation of the economic argument in all its nerdy glory. Good morning. I'm Melissa Harris Perry. Now, before we begin, the United Nations observers this morning say that they're suspending their activities in Syria because of escalating violence there. And this may be the latest sign that any efforts at a peace plan are deteriorating. We're going to get more on that from NBC's Richard Engel later this hour. But now to our top political story. This week, the candidates made it plain. 5 minutes apart and 250 miles away, both candidates for president laid out their very different visions for revving up the American economy. And no surprise, they did it in the battleground of Ohio. Mitt Romney spent most of his time outlining what President Obama hasn't done. But he did note a few things that he would do if elected in November. Take a listen.
I happen to like the sources of energy that we have in abundance in this country. Oil, coal, and natural gas. And I'm going to take advantage of those to get the energy costs low so we can have more jobs, manufacturing jobs, and bring them back to this country. I'm going to get rid of Obamacare. Number three, I'm going to go after the deficit.
Minutes after Governor Romney finished his speech in Cincinnati, it was President Obama's turn in Cleveland. And he left no doubt about what the number one issue in this election is.
This election is about our economic future. Yes, foreign policy matters. Social issues matter. But more than anything else, this election presents a choice between two fundamentally different visions of how to create strong, sustained growth, how to pay down our long-term debt.
Now, what the president wanted to make clear this week is how we got here in the first place.
From 2001 to 2008, we had the slowest job growth in half a century. The typical family saw their incomes fall. The failure to pay for the tax cuts and the wars took us from record surpluses under President Bill Clinton to record deficits.
The president's framing is clear. The economic problems he's facing, that we're facing, are the ones that he inherited. But his challenge is to have that message resonate with the American people, who right about now don't necessarily want to hear a professorial argument, even if it is accurate. For many voters, the thinking is actually much more like this.
Louder! Show me the money! That's it, brother, but you got to yell at Show me the money! I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money!
Show me the money. So who are people really blaming? Now, according to a recent Gallup poll, while 52% of Americans give moderate to a great deal of blame to President Obama for our bad economy, 68% blame President George W. Bush. But don't celebrate too quickly. When that very same question was asked in July of 2009, 80% gave moderate to a great deal of blame to President George W. Bush, while 32% blamed President Obama. And the thing about Bush? He's not on the ballot. So those numbers aside, here's what else we need to know. No president since the Great Depression has been reelected with an 8.2% unemployment rate. And the only incumbent to come close was Ronald Reagan, who was reelected in 1984 with a 7.2% unemployment rate. Now, that, however, was actually an improvement from the 7.5% unemployment rate he'd inherited from President Jimmy Carter, who we all remember was defeated in his 1980 election. So numbers, even as stark as these, are not destiny. The president still has an economic argument to make, accomplishments to tout, and a vision to offer. But do Americans have a clear grasp on the economic accomplishments of the Obama administration? Quick, name three. Oh, right. You see, he's got them, but if you can't name them, then that's part of the problem. I'm not blaming you. This is actually a fundamental part of success. Branding. Time for President Obama to start tooting his own horn, because his challenger is framing the conversation like this.
Look, if there's ever been a president who has not given a fair shot to the middle-income Americans of this great nation, it is Barack Obama.
And then there's the gaffe, at least as some people called it, that was heard around the political world last week.
The truth of the matter is that, as I said, we've created 4.3 million jobs over the last 27 months, over 800,000 just this year alone. The private sector is doing fine.
The president later amended his remarks to note that the economy was not doing fine, but the opposition was already making it into commercials. So did he go far enough this week? After all, the private sector really isn't doing that bad. But the public sector? That's another story. As noted by this chart, corporate profits are no longer plummeting. In fact, they're at a steep incline. And the assumption that corporations aren't doing well at all, well, that's false. The assumption that they're not hiring because they don't have enough money, that's false. Why should they hire people if they can make huge profits without doing so? So the president will have to translate how he plans to continue to pull us all back from the brink of economic disaster, whether it's through direct government job provisions, more small business loans, or simply holding the line and seeing if he gets a more cooperative Congress in his next term. One thing's for sure, he cannot afford for his message on the economy to get lost in translation. He needs to be crystal clear with where he wants this economy to go so the voters can decide if that's the vision that they would like to choose. At the table is Israel Ortega, editor of Heritage's Foundation's Libertad.org, and Tara McGinnis, Senior Vice President for Communications, the Center for American Progress, and my friend, MSNBC anchor Thomas Roberts. Thanks to all of you for joining me this morning. Thanks. Okay, so the economy is the central issue in this election. Did President Obama go far enough this week in making his claim?
You know, it was interesting because we got to be on the air together after the presidential briefing, and the president said those words, the private sector is doing just fine, but he followed it up by creating the contrast of what that statement was meant to represent. The private sector is doing fine, talking about job growth, but the public sector, the real estate market, looking at this big, it's sitting right in front of me, real estate. The president was setting up those three conversations, but saying this is what our administration needs to focus on, and setting up that contrast with what's going on with the public sector. Did he do a good job of it? Maybe not, because that statement can be utilized and used over and over again to drive home that statement while the private sector is doing fine.
Right, and that's what felt hard about it, is that it was a much shorter speech than what we heard in Ohio, but it was a pretty complicated speech, one trying to explain our connection with Europe and what was going on domestically. But the thing that came out of it was the private sector is doing fine.
Go ahead.
I think, I've worked on a large number of campaigns, and this question about gaffes and when they stick and when they don't stick. They stick when they're a larger story that they have to tell. I mean, I worked for John Kerry, and when we had, when the clip of John Kerry saying I voted for the war before I voted against it stuck, because there was a larger story going on about that. But nobody believes that the president thinks that things are fine.
Yeah, but why not double down on the fine, though? Part of what I was thinking is, okay, but there are those record profits. Why not say, no, seriously, when I said it's doing fine, maybe I don't mean there's no room for growth, but I actually do mean that compared to the public sector, our problem here is not private corporations with sufficient tax breaks, private corporations with enough money to hire workers. Let's get our focus on the public sector.
Well, that perception continues to exist that the president hasn't done enough to fix the economy. And as you alluded to earlier, that's part of the challenge for the president right now, is trying to sell some of his policies. But look, I mean, bottom line is, if you look at it at a macro level, we've tried essentially to spend our way out of this recession, and it hasn't worked. And essentially, if President Obama is reelected, he's going to continue a large measure of those policies. And I think that's where the pushback is.
We did start trying to spend our way out of it, right? There was this massive stimulus package early on that was provided. And I think there's at least mixed evidence, potentially even strong evidence, that that stimulus package was moving us in the right way. Then we had the Tea Party deficit hawks, and it moved backwards. So we only tried for just a minute. We actually didn't do a sustained stimulus.
You make a great point, though, about the fact that the president needs to be unapologetic about the fact that private businesses are sitting on $2 trillion in financial resources that they could open up to hiring and allow for that to happen. But if they've learned that they can do and earn more by doing less, that's capitalism at its best. So they're going to continue to bank away on this cash. So the president, if he wants to be unapologetic, he could be, but that's going to hurt people in the middle class, people that have been struggling through all of this, who don't need a reminder at how bad it was in the early 2000s, who don't need a reminder at how bad it got in 2008, and then where we are today coming up to this election.
It's interesting you say this about needing a reminder. In 1994, David Axelrod, who at that point was so unimportant to the American public that you'll see on this thing we're about to watch that his name is spelled David Axelron. Here's what he had to say about talking about sort of things being okay when people are still hurting. Let's look at David Axelron.
As you cite these statistics that say the economy is improving, you almost do political damage to yourself. If you stand up and claim great progress, you're only frustrating this alienated middle class more.
So how does the president take credit for, I've done some good things here, without doing what his own senior advisor, in 94 said, if
really
you do that.
Hair.
Yes, with dark hair and the wrong
dark
spelling
hair.
of his name.
Listen, I think that's what he did this week. He did three things. He talked about where we came from. First, we were at the precipice. We're at the edge of the cliff. Then he talked about, what he's been trying to do, what we did. You said the stimulus has mixed results. Even Republican economist Doug Holtz-Eakin, who worked for McCain, agreed that 80% of economists think the stimulus worked. Yeah. We've had 4.3 million jobs created in the private sector in the past 27 months.
And part of what I want to ask you about here is, so if in fact we say, okay, there's two visions here. One is the president who laid out education, energy, innovation as his vision, and then we have small government on the part of Republicans. Yeah. What is a president who will be the head of government, not the head of a corporation? He will be the head of our government. What is he meant to do if government is supposedly incapable of restarting and creating jobs and the economy?
Well, there is a role for the government to play here, of course, which is to provide an environment for the private sector to really grow. I mean, what makes this country thrive and unemployment eventually go down is small businesses really growing, and that does include regulations. And the fact is, the president and this administration have imposed heavy burden on small businesses. Obamacare, of course, is another element to that. And so, absolutely,
well, stop there.
Yeah.
Because I hear that a lot. The Obamacare is part of that.
Yeah.
Why would a federal program that says every individual needs to buy into healthcare. Yeah. Why would that be a burden on small businesses?
Well, I mean, look, if you're a small business owner now, you're going to have to provide health insurance to some of the employers. And so a small business owner is going to have to decide whether they're going to hire another employer or have to provide health insurance for all of their employees. I mean, that's part of the way the law is written. So those are real-time.
It exempts small businesses. There's that piece. They took that into consideration when the piece was being.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like this language of the Obamacare is. I mean, the one thing that Republicans I think did beautifully here that President Obama's administration and re-election campaign have done less well is to brand, right? I mean, we hear Obamacare and we believe a bunch of things about it that may or may not be true, but the GOP has done a really wonderful job of setting that up as scary and job killing when it's not at all clear to me that it in fact is.
It's become a dirty word like moderate's become a dirty word.
Compromise.
Compromise is a dirty word. But you can't forget that Mitt Romney is basically the godfather of Obamacare and what he did in Massachusetts and the conversations that they're going to have in the debates. Boy, I can't wait.
Yeah, I really am going to love the health care question that will undoubtedly emerge because it's going to be really tough for Governor Romney to move. I mean, part of what he's wanted to do is say, I'm the business guy. But the fact is he does have a governing record, and it includes a health care plan for Massachusetts that looks like the one that was passed by the U.S. Congress for the overall country.
The thing about the conversation that we heard this week in Ohio, which was really interesting, the fact that both of these candidates are in Ohio giving these speeches, the closest they've been in proximity on the campaign we've seen, 250 miles apart, and the president choosing to go to Cleveland and speak to a community college and speak to students. And, I grew up lower middle class in a row home in Baltimore County, Maryland, and I had a lot of friends that went to community college as a transitional way to get into four-year institutions. Yep. It's a great thing that this administration has done. The first time that an administration has focused on the importance of community colleges in this country. Yep. And the students that go through those institutions, you as a professor know, you probably end up with a lot of kids in your classes that started out getting, their start first 2 semesters or so at that community college. Mitt Romney going to Cincinnati talking to manufacturing to get that arm of, close to the Kentucky border there where they know that Ohio is going to be so important, but speaking to manufacturing and those people that are, blue-collar workers, and they're looking for a bigger a bigger leadership vision,
right,
from whoever their president's going to be.
I'm going to let you back in, I promise, Izzy. But coming up, Mitt Romney's economic vision, since we've talked a bit about the president's. But first, a trivia question. What was the unemployment rate the month before George W. Bush was reelected in 2004 and the month before Bill Clinton was reelected in 1996? I'm going to have the answer for that right after the break.